They laughed at her, mocked her, whispered behind her back like cowards, all because she wore a pair of old dog tags around her neck. To them, she was just some quiet girl with scuffed boots and no friends. But what they didn't know was that every step she took echoed with classified history. Every scar she had a name. And just when their bullying peaked, a black SUV rolled up, unmarked, tinted windows. And the second those government plates came into view, everything changed. The school went silent. The bullies froze. Because the man who stepped out wasn't here for them, he was here for her. This isn't just a story of bullying. It's a story of identity, silence, and the kind of respect you earn in ways they'll never understand. And by the end, you'll know why you never judge a soldier by her silence. They noticed her on the very first day, but not in the way that people usually notice someone new. She didn't make a grand entrance. She didn't try to blend in either. She simply walked into the room, quietly, almost like she'd been there all along. Her posture was straight, shoulders square, and there was something unnervingly calm about the way she carried herself. She wore plain clothes, nothing flashy, nothing loud. But hanging around her neck were a pair of old, worn military dog tags. And that's what drew them in. Not curiosity. Not admiration. Just something to pick at. Whispers started immediately. Some kids exchanged smirks. Others rolled their eyes. It was a high school where appearance meant everything, where labels defined worth and social groups were carved into stone. In this place, she didn't belong, not by their rules. By the second lunch break, rumors had already started flying. One girl said she wore those tags because she was trying too hard. Another said she probably stole them from her dad. A group of boys joked that she was some kind of GI Barbie. They'd make barking noises when she walked past, laughing like hyenas behind her back, just loud enough so she'd hear, just quiet enough to pretend they hadn't said anything at all. She never responded. That only made them bolder. The bullying wasn't the loud kind, not at first. It wasn't fists or threats. It was the slow, calculated erosion of someone's place in the world. It was the way people moved away when she sat down. The way group projects suddenly had no space. The way her locker would be tampered with, texts ripped up, her boots stuffed with gum, notes taped that said things like fetch or sit. Every small act was designed to chip away at her presence, to shrink her down into invisibility. But she didn't shrink. She never bowed her head. She never changed lockers. She never took off the tags. They hated that. One boy in particular made it his mission to see her react. He'd follow her between classes, taunting her, barking in her ear, saying things like, "Who gave you those? Your boyfriend who ran off?" Or, "Bet you just bought him online to look tough." He'd slap them with a pencil as she passed, just to hear them jingle, just to mock the sound of something sacred to someone else. His friends laughed with him, encouraging it all. None of the teachers said anything. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they did, and just thought it was harmless. After all, she wasn't reacting. One day in gym class, he yanked the tags right off her neck. The whole locker room went quiet. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked at him, cold, steady. For a second, even he seemed shaken. Then he laughed it off, tossed them into the air, and walked away like nothing had happened. She picked them up, one by one, dusted them off, and hung them back around her neck. And the next day, she showed up again, same posture, same silence, same tags. It drove them crazy. They thought she was weak because she didn't retaliate. They thought she was fake because she never explained herself. But what they failed to understand was that there are some battles you don't fight with words. Some stories you don't share with strangers. They didn't know what those tags meant. They didn't know who had given them to her, or what she'd had to survive to keep wearing them. And, because they didn't understand her, they tried to destroy her. She never raised her voice. Never told anyone to stop. Not once did she ask for help, even when the whispers turned into open laughter, and the laughter turned into pranks. She simply watched, observed, endured. There was a strength in her silence that unsettled them, though they didn't realize it. At first, they mistook it for passivity, for weakness, for permission. They thought her quiet meant she didn't care, that she was numb, oblivious, or afraid. But the truth was, she was watching everything, memorizing every face, every comment, every act of cruelty with a calm precision they couldn't begin to comprehend. Her silence was never empty. It was loaded, dense with unspoken stories. She sat in classrooms, never flinching at the snide remarks thrown her way. She walked through hallways, steady as ever, while lockers slammed behind her and shoes squeaked with mock stomps meant to startle her. Her expression rarely changed. And when it did, it wasn't fear they saw, it was disappointment. That subtle, piercing look that seemed to ask, "Is this all you are?" And that got under their skin in a way yelling never could. Some of the teachers noticed, but they misunderstood the silence too. They saw a quiet student who kept to herself and assumed she was just shy or withdrawn. Maybe a bit odd. Nobody ever sat her down to ask what was really happening. Nobody ever looked closely enough to see the scratches on her notebooks where cruel messages had been carved, or the dusting of sugar on her seat from a prank that had no punchline. When people don't scream, the world assumes there's no pain. But she was carrying something heavy. That weight didn't come from the bullying itself, but from the constant decision not to respond. Every day, she chose to contain what others would have exploded. Every joke, every glare, every attempt to break her was another layer pressed against her restraint. It wasn't silence born from helplessness, it was silence born from discipline. From a past that had taught her that not every insult deserves an answer, not every war begins with noise, and not every enemy looks like one. In the cafeteria, she always sat at the far end of the table, back to the wall, facing the door. Always alert, always scanning. Some thought it was just a quirk. Others mocked her for it, calling her the watchdog. They didn't know that she had been trained to observe patterns, to read movements, to stay prepared. They didn't know that her father, or maybe her mother, or maybe both, had taught her more than just how to wear a uniform. They had taught her how to survive without giving away a thing. One afternoon, someone replaced her water bottle with one filled with vinegar. She took a sip, paused, and calmly poured the rest into the trash. No reaction. No complaint. No scene. They watched, expecting a breakdown, but all they got was silence again. The silence that said more than any outburst could. Over time, it started to affect them in strange ways. They found themselves checking over their shoulders, unsure why her presence lingered in their minds longer than they wanted it to. Some avoided her eyes completely. Others grew more aggressive, like they were trying to crack a code. They didn't understand why she didn't snap. They didn't understand why nothing seemed to break her. What they didn't know was that her silence was a shield forged in something far older and deeper than high school cruelty. Each step she took down the hallway was a quiet defiance. Every ignored insult was a boundary she refused to let them cross. They thought they were winning, that her quietness meant surrender, when in reality, it was control. Total, calculated control. The dog tags weren't shiny. They didn't glint under the hallway lights or make any sort of fashion statement. The metal was dulled from wear, the edges slightly nicked, and the chain looked like it had been repaired more than once. They didn't look like something bought from a novelty store or picked up at a flea market. They looked lived in. Real. But of course, no one noticed that. They saw them as props, something to joke about, to ridicule, to pull at and question. No one paused long enough to ask where they came from, or more importantly, why she wore them every single day without fail. There were initials etched into them, deep, clean cuts that hadn't faded with time. A blood type, a branch, a service number. All of it was there. And she never once tried to hide it. She wore them like they were part of her. Not as an accessory, but as something earned or maybe inherited. She never spoke about them, not even when the question started. Not even when someone asked, mockingly, "Are those even real?" And she just looked back at them like the question didn't deserve oxygen. At first, people assumed they were her father's. Some said maybe her brothers. But soon the theories grew more outlandish. She probably bought them online, one girl whispered, trying to look tough. Others thought it was some kind of performance, like wearing camo without serving. They didn't understand that she wasn't trying to prove anything. The tags weren't for them. They weren't for recognition or show. They were a part of a story that didn't belong to anyone else. One day in class, a teacher asked everyone to bring in something meaningful for a personal artifact presentation. Students brought childhood toys, photographs, medals from spelling bees, or trophies from soccer tournaments. When it was her turn, she walked to the front, reached under her collar, and held up the dog tags. She didn't say much. Just a few words about honoring someone. About promises kept. Her voice didn't tremble, her hands didn't shake. But there was something final about her tone, like whatever those tags represented was too heavy to fit into a 5-minute speech. The room was silent for once. No one laughed. No one smirked. She didn't explain any further. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes filled in every blank they'd tried to draw. After that day, the rumors didn't stop, but they shifted. Now, some whispered about her being connected to something bigger. Maybe she had lost someone in combat. Maybe she had served herself. Maybe both. But even with the new speculation, the bullying continued. Because people fear what they don't understand. And her silence, paired with the quiet authority those tags carried, made them feel small. She kept wearing them day in and day out. Through every season, through every insult. They became her signature. Not just a symbol, but a quiet declaration. That someone she loved, or maybe someone she was, had earned those. That they were not to be touched, joked about, or questioned. But of course, people still did. One afternoon, a group cornered her in the hallway, laughing as one boy reached out and flicked the tags. The metallic clink echoed through the corridor. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just stared at him. And in that moment, something in his laughter faltered. As if he'd crossed a line he couldn't see but could suddenly feel. The legacy of those dog tags wasn't printed on the surface. It was stitched into her spine, settled deep in her chest. They didn't just hang from her neck, they anchored her. Every scratch on that metal held weight. Every letter stamped into them was a piece of a story no one had earned the right to hear. It was just after fourth period when the first glimpse of it appeared. The air outside was still, heavy with summer heat rising off the pavement. Most of the students were inside, their noise echoing through the halls, but a few lingered near the windows, half distracted, half bored. Then someone noticed the black SUV. Not just any SUV, this one was different. Sleek. Clean. No stickers, no school logos. The windows were so dark you couldn't see inside. And the license plate? Government plates. Official. Quiet. Powerful. At first, nobody thought much of it. Maybe a district visit or a security check. But the longer it sat there, engine running, the more it began to draw attention. One of the boys who had been teasing her just moments ago pressed his face to the glass and joked about the FBI coming to take someone away. The laughter came easy, mean-spirited and loud. She was just walking down the hallway then, same as always. Dog tags resting against her chest. Head high. Eyes forward. She didn't look at the SUV. She didn't react to the comments. But something in her walk shifted, barely perceptible. Like she already knew. When the bell rang, the corridors flooded with students. The doors swung open, and for a few seconds, no one stepped outside. Everyone was watching the black vehicle. It hadn't moved. Then the driver's door cracked open, slowly, like a scene from a movie. A figure stepped out. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Wearing plain clothes, but nothing about him looked ordinary. His posture was deliberate. Eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He glanced once at the building, then reached for the rear door. The moment that back door opened, everything changed. Another figure stepped out. Sharp. Controlled. Dressed in a charcoal suit that didn't wrinkle, with a pin on the lapel that only meant one thing to those who recognized it. No one said anything. No one needed to. Authority clung to him like a shadow. He didn't speak. He didn't look around. He simply adjusted his earpiece and turned toward the school entrance. The silence that swept the front steps was total. A group of girls who had been giggling earlier now stood frozen, their eyes darting between each other. One of the teachers, just walking out to supervise lunch, actually stopped mid-step. The man in the suit approached the entrance with a precision that felt rehearsed. Not hurried, not casual. Purposeful. Intentional. The boy who had yanked her tags the week before was standing just a few feet away. He muttered something under his breath, trying to mask his sudden discomfort with a joke, but no one laughed this time. She had just turned the corner. As she walked toward the front steps, the man in the suit straightened. The second he saw her, his expression changed not with surprise, but with recognition. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply nodded. The reaction from the crowd was immediate but silent. A collective shift. Students exchanged confused looks. Some stared at her, then at the man. One girl whispered, "Is he here for her?" But no one answered. She kept walking, calm, steady, as if this was just another part of her day. As if black SUVs with government plates waited for her all the time. When she reached the bottom of the steps, the man in the suit stepped aside, holding the door open, not out of obligation, but out of respect. And that's when people knew. Knew they had misunderstood her. Knew they had judged without knowing anything. The silence that had once been used to mock her now surrounded her like a shield. No one moved. No one spoke. Eyes followed her every step, trying to catch up to a story they had never bothered to learn. He stepped out of the SUV with slow, deliberate movements, like a man who had walked into enough rooms to know he never needed to rush. The door shut behind him with a muted thud that seemed louder than anything else on that street. His suit was pressed, his shoes polished, but nothing about him felt decorative. This was a man with purpose, and it wasn't hard to tell. His eyes scanned the area behind a pair of dark sunglasses, and his posture told anyone watching that he was not someone to be ignored. By now, students had begun to gather along the front steps and behind classroom windows. Word spread fast. Something was happening outside, and it wasn't just a school visit. Phones discreetly appeared in hands. Whispers raced from one mouth to another. Who is he? Why is he here? Secret Service? FBI. The presence of the SUV alone had stirred curiosity. But the presence of this man shifted that curiosity into tension. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence that followed him into the courtyard said enough. And then she came into view. She didn't change her pace. Didn't glance around. Just kept walking toward him, eyes steady, expression unreadable. It was the first time anyone had ever seen her stand out, not because she looked out of place, but because for the first time, everything else did. The man turned as she approached. He stood straighter. Not in intimidation, but in recognition. His chin lifted slightly, and with a calm, controlled movement, he nodded once, slowly. He didn't offer his hand. She didn't need it. Instead, he took a small step to the side, allowing her to pass him, and opened the SUV's back door with the kind of precision that told everyone this had been done many times before. She didn't hesitate. She slid into the back seat without a word, without a glance toward the crowd gathering behind her. That's when the confrontation began, not with shouting or violence, but with silence that cut deeper than any insult ever had. The boy who had harassed her the most was standing closest to the steps, his voice now caught in his throat. He had made her the punchline of every joke, day after day. He had tugged at her dog tags, mocked her boots, called her names in front of the others. And now all he could do was stare. His lips were parted like he wanted to say something, to laugh, to deny, to explain, but nothing came out. A teacher, standing nearby, shifted awkwardly. She had seen the bullying, even if she had pretended not to. She had written it off as teasing, typical teenage cruelty, harmless. But there was nothing harmless about the way the scene unfolded now. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some strange misunderstanding. The man had come here for her. And everyone knew what that meant. even if they didn't know exactly what it meant. The door shut behind her, sealing her inside the vehicle that radiated authority and silence in equal measure. The man stood there for a moment longer, scanning the crowd. Not threatening. Just watching. As if he was memorizing faces. As if he already knew them. Then he circled around the SUV, got back into the front passenger seat, and the engine came alive with a quiet growl that felt heavier than any noise on that block. No one moved. No one dared to speak. They all stood there, frozen in place, held still not by fear but by the overwhelming weight of realization. Everything they had assumed about her, every cruel word, every whispered joke, every act of humiliation, was unraveling. And they were left standing there exposed, while she disappeared behind tinted glass, escorted by someone who clearly didn't answer to school principals. The SUV disappeared down the street, but the silence it left behind lingered like a shadow over the school courtyard. No one spoke. No one moved. The crowd that had gathered began to slowly scatter, students drifting away in stunned confusion. A few turned to their friends, as if looking for some kind of explanation, but none was given. The ones who had laughed the loudest were the quietest now. Something had changed, and it wasn't just about her. It was about everything they thought they knew about power, about presence, about who mattered. In the days that followed, the air around her shifted. Not because she said anything. She still walked the same halls, sat in the same seats, wore the same dog tags. But the way people looked at her had changed. Where there was once mockery, there was uncertainty. Where there had been laughter, now there was hesitation. The boy who had pulled at her tags in the hallway no longer made eye contact. He walked the other way when she appeared. The girls who had whispered about her in the bathroom now sat 2 rows away instead of right behind her. It wasn't fear they felt, it was a strange kind of respect, born not from understanding but from exposure. She never acknowledged the shift. She didn't walk taller, didn't act victorious. She didn't remind anyone of what had happened. There was no need. She'd never been trying to prove anything in the first place. The dog tags still hung around her neck, and the silence she carried returned unchanged, but now interpreted differently. Before, they had mistaken it for weakness. Now, they saw it as something else. Something they couldn't define. A silence that wasn't emptiness, but command. One day, during a fire drill, the students were ushered outside in neat lines. The teachers called out names, checked lists. She stood near the edge of the group, arms folded, eyes scanning the parking lot, not nervously, but habitually. A teacher noticed and asked, half joking, "You look like you're planning something." She looked over, didn't smile, just said, "Just paying attention." And it struck the teacher, not as strange, but as practiced. Like someone who had been trained to notice exits, threats, patterns. During group projects, students began volunteering to be on her team. Not because they wanted to be friends, but because they sensed something valuable in her presence. The way she listened more than she spoke. The way she gave space to others without shrinking herself. The way her eyes seemed to see through the surface of things. She never acted like a leader, but somehow, people began to follow her lead. The respect didn't come in grand gestures. It came in glances that didn't linger too long, in nods from across the hall, in the absence of mockery. It came in the way doors were no longer slammed in her face, how her locker remained untouched. It came quietly, almost awkwardly, like the building itself was trying to apologize. She never asked for any of it. She had simply endured. Held her ground. Let the weight of her silence do what noise never could. The dog tags, once the object of ridicule, had become something no one dared question anymore. They didn't need to know the story behind them. Somehow, not knowing made it even more powerful. It reminded them that not every story is owed to everyone, and not every silence is an absence. She never raised her voice to demand respect. She didn't need to. The SUV, the man in the suit, the way they came and left without explanation, all of it had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could. But what remained afterward was even more profound. The unshakable truth that the quietest person in the room might carry the heaviest truth. And when that truth is worn with dignity, respect doesn't need to be forced, it follows.